Welcome to this episode of the Ohio Lodge of Research podcast, OLR Connections. We sit down with worshipful brother Mike Clevenger. In this episode, he describes his vision for the leadership training and education of Masons and Masonic lodges. I've always known you as the education guy, or one of the education guys. So, other than obvious answers, how did you get involved? Why was that such a compelling part of Masonry for you?
The more I read, the more I found out that I believed that, and still believe this today, that Masonry was missing a great opportunity to take advantage of some of um, this education for leadership and developing not only officers, but developing and providing education in their organizations. So it was after about 10 years of teaching there on the Shriners International level that I got hit with a big light bulb. And that light bulb was, wait a minute, we've got this set of three uh, degrees. We've got a ritual book, and that in itself is a personal development program laid out before us.
In a year, you went through every district and pretty much exposed as many Masons to your leadership program as you could. Was there anything that you would have liked to have accomplished with that you didn't? Or is there, if you had the opportunity to start it up again, how would you do it differently, or how would you change it? Or
I had, when I sat down with the final plan, I had 5 years charted out. There was the initial first year that eventually became what I called Becoming Masonry. That was that whole program. I created a second one called the Masonic Leaders Trestle Board, which was all about leadership, a leader planning and taking effective planning techniques and applying it to their lodge. I had envisioned over that period of time expanding both of those programs to training within each district and produce qualified trainers on the program, so that those were constantly, so one guy can't kill himself forever, but so that there would be qualified men in each district that would carry on the message and continue the material. And so my hope was that this would be ever building. I had built out marketing plans for it. I had built out all kinds of things. So yeah, I had great hopes for expanding that program. Also wanted to expand what I called the master, what did I call that? The master craftsman groups, which was an informal discussion of those taking the course in a locale to get together on a periodic and regular basis to have these discussions we were just talking about a little while ago. So yeah, I had plans to expand that greatly.
I think it's an opportunity that a lot of lodges are missing. And I think even just in the simplicity of the progressive line, right? You bring someone in as a steward, and you have 7 years roughly to teach them how to be a good leader on top of being a Mason and so forth. If you were, this may be kind of a hard or a loaded question, but if you were setting forth a plan for a lodge in the training of its officers in that progressive line, is there anything that you would encourage them to do that you don't see lodges currently doing, missed opportunities, if you will?
Well, yeah, certainly. And I began in my own lodge, an officer training program. And that would be what I would suggest. The officer training program that I began in my lodge centered around some of the deficiencies I found in lodges and shrine temples and other Masonic organizations I taught. And see if I can recall, there's about four things. Number one was the lack of unified vision. In other words, they were not on the same page. So an officer, for example, comes in and says, you know, our job here is to be a Masonic lodge, and they all have a different idea about what that is and what that should entail. And we both know that there are lodges that are community oriented. There are lodges that have, like arts and sciences, who were education dedicated. And so getting a unified, vision together among your officers who are going to lead your lodge is very, very important. So I would start there and then expand that. Say, hey, this is the officer's idea. What's the rest of the guys in the lodge think? You need to expand that out into, and smaller lodges, everybody could get in a room and figure that out. The second thing was communication. We generally, as a fraternity, go as high as you want. We do not do a good job of communicating at the lodge level and other levels of letting Masons know what's going on and planning ahead so that lodge activities are well publicized, putting out notices that are entice people to come, publish the menu of a good meal, publish the topic, and build it around creating this. We all talk about a great Masonic experience. Publicize that. So communication's another thing. I think officer teams should understand each other. They should understand each other's limitations. We have a problem finding men who are willing to serve. And we all know that we talk about the young men raising families, some of them maybe going to school, some of them having children and activities. They have limited time. So getting the officers together and having them share, hey, at the beginning of the month, have an officer meeting and say, okay, here's our activities to the month. Let's share. Are you going to be able to fulfill your obligation? If not, how can we cover this guy? So building this team that is willing to give to each other, is willing to hold each other accountable, and have discussions where they disagree on maybe a method or how we're going to go about this. But in the end, come out as, okay, our vision is to create the best lodge, Masonic experience we can. Here are our goals. Everything we do needs to center and focus on that. So that's the type of training that I see lodges need. I mean, many of them come together and they really don't come together as that cohesive unit. So I think a lot of training needs to go into that and give them practical ways that they can communicate via officer teams and also hold each other accountable. I remember being at years ago I was invited to the Grand Lodge Education Committee meetings, and I think that's when Chad Kopinski was chairman. We had an impromptu discussion about that lodges and those seeking to fill officer positions were afraid to ask for commitment anymore because of this time constraint. And so we're afraid to say, look, if you're going to hold your hand up and be an officer, you got to be at every meeting. You've got to dress like this. You've got to do some additional training available here, here, and here. You have to understand how to run our lodges. You have to read the code in the section that's that. You have to read our bylaws. And we have, I think there's an area that um, we fall down on. And I chuckle as I think about the master I worked with a couple of years before I left, and he was very, very interested in building this Masonic experience. And so I laid out an officer proficiency schedule for every officer, and they had been written before. And that involved education section, training section, ritual, uh, and a whole method where by the end of when they served as master, they knew everything that they needed to know, ritual and management wise. So it needs to be a specific method of training on a progressive nature as that officer moves up, so they learn the right way and not by, hey, this is what I did, go ahead, everybody won't mind, that'll be okay. Yeah, we need to put a disciplined program in there and make sure that we all agree we're going to follow in the lodge. I know that's easy for me to say, and I've tried it. It's hard to do. I mean, it's hard to do.
Yeah. But I think, what I've seen, at least in some instances, is I think that a lot of these guys that are stepping up and willing to be officers, they want that guidance. They want that structure. They want to be told how to be better. And it's almost like we're doing them a disservice by
I agree.
giving them a way out.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah, it's the path of least resistance. It's easier. It's easier than trying to make that hard change.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so, and also, it depends upon the master's attitude, and how he relates to his other officers. If he comes off as one of those command type worshipful masters, doesn't understand that he is a servant. He's not only serving his laws, but he's serving his officers, and tries to dictate behavior changes, he's going to fail. Unless he's got the background of building successful relationships with these people. You can't ask for extended commitment unless you have some kind of solid relationship
Yeah.
with someone. So
Yeah. Agreed.
it's an area that, as far as lodge development, I think it's crucial. Really is.
So I think, what we need is a lodge training guidebook published by worshipful brother Clevenger. I think that's what the world needs. Take
Well,
your acquired knowledge and put it together for us.
well, actually, it's interesting you bring that up. The Masonic Service Association, I have a copy of one they did, oh my goodness, 30 years ago.
Okay.
Um, there are several others that I know about. Actually, the last program before I stopped teaching for Shriners International, I wrote essentially a planning guide for the officer group that we were teaching, and could be readily adapted to a Masonic lodge, because a lot of the pieces came from documents I'd created for Masonic lodges. That's the other big area of downfall and deficiency in a lodge is lack of planning. Lack of planning to hold events, to hold the Masonic year, to create a direction of education. And so planning is something that's needed. I agree with you.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'll write that book, but there
It's
is a need.
it sounds like it's mostly written. If I, as an outsider looking in, I mean, it may not all be on paper, so to speak, but at least
What is? It
rattling
really
around in
is.
that brain of yours, it looks like it's mostly written.
Well, one of my problems here, as a quick aside, is I have these. I've been thinking about leadership, education, and masonry for 20 years.
Right.
And I have these ideas, like right now, I probably got 5 or 6 projects that I am really loving that I can't get one done for thinking of a new one. And so, and that keeps me active, it keeps me involved, but doesn't help the fraternity if I can't produce a product that's gonna help.
Yeah. No, I completely relate and resemble that remark. I'm really good at starting new ideas. Bringing them to fruition is my challenge. So, um,
Yeah,
I'm assuming,
and that's a whole course, by the way, I think.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was a part of an effort about 10 years ago. You ever heard of Freemason University?
Mhm.
I was part of that effort, thought up by Right Wishful brother Greg Smith, Jack Allen, most wishful Jack Allen was involved, Chad Simpson, Dwayne Kimberly, and myself, and we produced some great videos, ritual appreciation, lodge management, leadership. So I have all those, and that website's not up anymore, but I have those videos. So I'm repurposing them and putting, there's a new playlist on that Masons Lead Better YouTube channel called Freemason University. And there are some wonderful things Jack does and Chad does about ritual appreciation, memorization of ritual. Dwayne Kimberly has some wonderful things about lodge management. There's one up there now about 5 stories or 3 stories a Mason needs to develop and know so he can share the message of Masonry. Sorry for that, but those are efforts that are ongoing, and I find myself getting buried in one or the other every now and then.
Yeah, no, don't apologize. That's actually very helpful because I've recently had some conversations about Freemason University, and I've had people ask me if those videos are still out there somewhere. And my comment was, well, they have to be out there somewhere, but I don't know where. So now I know where.
Well, and I yeah, and I've got one queued up right now by Chad Simpson. That kind of be a tribute to Chad. He did one on discussing the universality of Freemasonry as it relates to the various faiths. Because as he points out in this video, that some Masons believe Masonry is a Christian organization, which we know it's not. So Chad does a wonderful one about that. So as time goes on, I will add as many as I can. Over time, hopefully we'll get those all back out.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think, the resources and any resources that are available are valuable to have and to use. And like you said, I mean, you've said several times, just the communication, getting the information out of what's available is oftentimes the hardest part. So what, and again, whether it's more from your writing or from activity or whatever, what's the future hold? Where do you see yourself going? What would you like to do that you haven't done, Masonically speaking?
Well, um, one of those, I mentioned earlier, one of those projects that I've lined up here is taking that Mason's Lead Better material and adapting it to a virtual course. Uh, Matter of fact, I have got parts of that done, uh, and those sections identified and partial scripts written about how I would teach that. Uh, and so I've been working on that. I think ultimately getting some of what I know in a understandable manner that someone could watch a video, uh, take the downloadable material and put together some thoughts, tie that together with some kind of periodic meeting with those people taking that course to substitute for being in the same room with them. That's a project that's ongoing. The 365 of Mason, I've identified a progressive web app. I've been testing one where I would move 365 of Mason into this app, would allow you to have that on your phone. It functions just like a normal smartphone app. And the lessons there, I've built some channels for news and that kind of thing. So I'm experimenting with that and hope to move my weekly message to that, which has some advantages. It would give um, you access to everything that's written. It would give access to those who wish to comment on those. Uh, it would function like a Facebook, but only in the fact that it would be contained with those who you want it to be. In other
Okay.
words, you can control the audience. So I'm
Interesting.
working on that project. I'm always looking at text things. Matter of fact, this app I'm talking about would be it. Are you familiar with Microsoft Teams?
Yeah.
It functions like a Microsoft Teams, but it's not that expensive. As a matter of fact, a lodge could uh, this could function as their website, a communication tool, a newsletter, because it automatically sends out a monthly or a weekly newsletter based on content posted to it. So I've been working on that. That's a Masonic project. Um, what else would I like to see happen? Eventually would like to see, and you mentioned that one of my avenues here, Masonic leadership or personal improvement education, reduced to a book, so that I can share with a wider audience. That's those are things that are on my future.
What about the Lodge of Research? I mean, you clearly are connected on, what's current as far as the web apps and virtual connecting tools and so forth. Is there anything that you would like to see the Lodge of Research do that we might be able to increase our offerings to our brothers?
Well, I think I mentioned it before. A periodic, regularly scheduled just discussion on a topic
Mhm.
of Masonic nature. It doesn't have to be a deep philosophical discussion. It doesn't have to be a deeply researched paper. It can be New England for a while was, and sadly it kind of fell apart. We had a monthly, what we called the New England Philosophical Society, and we scheduled out uh, a year's worth of topics. And each person would take one of the topics, and we would then get together and discuss it. One was on mental models. One was on what is virtue or something like that. But just a topic previously announced with some reading material required before, not a whole book. If you could do a whole book if you want. We did in the historic or the philosophical society, but say a short paper, or in our case, the person who was going to moderate put together a little study guide, and it included links to things you could read online, or text from certain reference materials. You read it ahead, come in, everyone engages, no sitting back listening. And I'd like to see something like that, whatever topic it may be, but more toward, as you hopefully gathered from my comments, more practical side of masonry. I was glad to see Right Wishful Brother Bill Carter in his rollout say, guys, remember when the pandemic was going on? Remember how we touched base virtually? I mean, for a guy now who is 450 miles away from my home lodge, a meeting like that once a month just to see faces would be something that would enrich me as a Mason. But that's one idea.